It was a Friday night in early November, just after 9 p.m. I was in my apartment on the second floor, sitting in front of my laptop like I had been for the past couple of weeks. The glow from the screen was the only light in the room. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I glanced at it without much interest. It was my sister, again. She'd been calling me a lot lately, probably worried about me. I didn't answer. Truth be told, I wasn't in the mood for talking. Not to anyone. I hadn't been for a while. It wasn't that I didn't love her, but it felt like talking to people only made everything worse. I'd lost my job about 3 months ago, and I hadn't really done anything to try and find another one. Mostly, I just stayed at home. I didn't leave the apartment much, except to buy food. On those rare occasions I did go out, it was just to the grocery store or to get a coffee, and even that felt like a chore. Tonight, I didn't feel like scrolling through social media. I didn't feel like watching the same dumb YouTube videos I always watched when I was trying to kill time. So, I opened up a random Netflix horror movie I'd never heard of before. I wasn't expecting much. I never did anymore. The movie started. It was one of those low-budget, grainy things with bad acting, and you could tell from the first few minutes it wasn't going to be anything special. The audio was awful. Half the time I had to turn the volume way up just to hear the dialogue, and then some loud, jarring sound effect would kick in and almost blow out my eardrums. It was annoying, but I kept watching. I didn't know why. Maybe it was because the movie was so bad it was kind of funny. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something weird. There was a sound, something that didn't belong. It was a metallic clang, like a pipe hitting concrete. I kept hearing it every few minutes, and at first, I thought it was part of the movie. Then I realized it didn't match anything on the screen. Nobody was holding anything metallic, and no one was in any kind of factory or warehouse setting. It just seemed out of place, like the sound had been inserted in the wrong part of the film. I kept watching, not because I was interested in the movie, but because the sound was kind of bugging me. It was repetitive, same volume, same pitch. It almost felt like a mistake, like the filmmaker had looped it by accident. It didn't make any sense, but it was starting to get to me. I stood up to get a drink and left the movie paused. For a second, I forgot about the sound altogether. But when I came back, just as I was about to press play, I heard it again, the same metallic clang. I froze. It was sharp and loud, but it wasn't coming from the movie. It was coming from inside my apartment. I stood there, staring at the paused screen. My heart started racing. I wasn't sure if I had just imagined it, but then, just about a minute later, I heard the clang again. This time it was louder. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere in the apartment. My mind raced. I grabbed my phone, but I didn't want to call anyone. I didn't want to be that person who freaked out over something that probably wasn't a big deal. But then again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I stood there, frozen for a few seconds, trying to tell myself that maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just hearing things. But when I listened harder, the sound came again. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't coming from the television. It wasn't part of the movie. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the drawer and moved carefully from room to room, checking closets, behind the curtains, under the bed. The place was empty, just like I expected. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of forced entry. But my heart was still hammering in my chest. I moved up the stairs again, back toward the living room, and that's when I heard it again, the clang. This time, it was quieter, almost muffled. But it was coming from inside the apartment for sure. I was sure of it. I looked out the window. It was dark outside, but I could see the faint outline of the small backyard. I had left a couple of windows cracked to let in the cool air, and it hit me all at once. What if the sound wasn't from inside the apartment? What if it was coming from outside? I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peer out into the yard. My breath caught in my throat. There, standing just on the edge of the lawn, was a kid. He was tiny, almost too small to make out clearly. It was dark, and he was standing motionless, holding what looked like a metal pipe. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of it. For a second, I just stared at him, frozen. And then, The kid must have seen me because he swung the pipe, hitting the back of one of the deck chairs with a sharp clang. I jerked away from the window and stepped back, my heart racing in my chest. I had no idea what a kid was doing in my backyard in the middle of the night, especially with a pipe. It didn't make sense. I didn't even know who he was or where he had come from. My first thought was that maybe he was lost. Maybe he had wandered off from some house nearby. But then I thought about it more, and the whole thing started to feel off. Why wasn't he calling for help? Why wasn't he ringing the doorbell? Why was he just standing there, hitting a chair with a pipe over and over again? I shook my head, trying to push the fear away. It was probably nothing, but I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't just leave the kid out there. I slipped on my shoes and went downstairs. My plan was to go outside, see if he was okay, and maybe offer to help him find his way home. But when I reached the back door, I hesitated. Something about the situation felt wrong. My gut told me to turn back. Why hadn't he just knocked on the door? Why was he just standing there, so still? I backed away from the door slowly and looked through a small side window that overlooked the porch. And that's when I saw them. Two men. They were crouching low, hidden just below the back door, wearing all black. They were waiting for something. I froze, my body going cold. They hadn't noticed me, but I could see them clearly enough, and I knew they were planning something. They were waiting for me to open the door. I quickly backed away from the window and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking. I dialed 911 as quietly as I could, trying not to make any noise. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard the first crash downstairs. It was followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. They were inside the house. I ran to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. My heart was pounding, my breathing coming in short gasps. I could hear the men moving around downstairs, their footsteps growing louder. Then, I heard them climbing the stairs. The doorknob to the bathroom started to turn. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't know I was in there. But then there was a loud bang. They were trying to break the door down. I jumped back, panic surging through me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't think. My voice cracked as I yelled, "The police are on their way!" The banging stopped immediately. I waited, trembling, until I heard the sound of footsteps retreating. Then, silence. It wasn't much longer before the police arrived. I told them everything, but they didn't have much to go on. I didn't know who the men were, or why they'd been targeting me. All I knew was that the kid was somehow involved. That bothered me the most. The officers said it was probably a random attack, but something about it didn't feel random. It felt planned. It felt wrong. They never found the men, and I never saw the kid again. It's been a couple of years now, but I still think about that night. I still wonder about that kid and whether he's okay. Sometimes, when I hear a strange noise at night, I feel that same tightness in my chest. I wonder if I was just unluckier, if someone was watching me the whole time. I don't think I'll ever know. I worked as a night security guard for a small tech company based in downtown Denver. The office was in an old brick building, tucked away in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't anything fancy, just a few rooms, some old desks, and computers scattered around. The company wasn't very big either, only about 10 employees. I always found it a little odd that they even needed a security guard, especially for a place like this. The office was small, and there was hardly ever anyone there after hours. But my job was easy enough. I worked from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. I'd turn on the security system, check the cameras, and then sit in a small room with a monitor, watching the cameras all night. The cameras were old and low quality, so I didn't get a clear picture of anything happening outside. Most of the time, nothing happened, and the hours would drag by. But that night, something changed. The 22nd of March, it was around 1 a.m. when I first heard it. A faint click. It came from the hallway, like a door latch snapping shut. I sat there for a second, unsure if I heard it right. I waited for a moment, thinking it could just be the building settling. But then I heard it again, this time clearer. The sound of a door closing. I stood up, feeling a bit uneasy, and opened the door to the hallway. It was empty, just like I'd left it. The 3 doors down the hallway were all shut. No sign of anything unusual. I walked over to each door, checking briefly inside. The rooms were just as I'd expected: desks and office chairs. Computers powered off. Nothing strange. Maybe it was just my imagination, I thought. It had been a quiet night, and I was probably just hearing things. But something in the back of my mind made me want to be sure. The security system hadn't gone off, and the cameras hadn't picked up anything, so I didn't think anyone could be in the building. I went back to the security room and left the door open this time, hoping that if I heard the noise again, I could figure out what was going on. I sat back down, scrolling through the camera feeds. Nothing out of the ordinary. The building looked deserted, just like it should be. Another 20 minutes passed, and I was starting to let my guard down. The silence of the building was beginning to make me feel a little too comfortable. Then I heard it again, a faint creak of a door opening. It was subtle, but it was there. I stood up quickly, heart pounding in my chest. This time, I was sure I hadn't imagined it. I stepped into the hallway and immediately saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the doors was cracked open. I froze for a moment, confused. The cameras hadn't picked up anything. There hadn't been any alarms triggered. I didn't know how anyone could have gotten in without my noticing. I walked cautiously toward the open door, my footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. As I got closer, I saw that the door led into one of the larger offices, a room filled with empty desks and filing cabinets. I pushed the door open a little further, and then I stepped inside. At first, everything seemed normal. I walked past a few desks, my eyes scanning the room. Everything was dark, but it didn't feel right. There was something off about the atmosphere. Then, just as I reached the back of the room, I saw it. A shadow, a small movement on the wall. My heart stopped. I turned my head slowly, and that's when I saw him. A man was crouched beneath one of the desks, his body half hidden in the shadows. His dark eyes locked onto mine instantly. His face was pale, and he had dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. He looked terrified, but there was also something else in his eye, Sanger. Maybe? I couldn't tell. For a split second, we just stared at each other. I didn't know what to do. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was frozen. Then, the man started to stand up, his movements jerky and quick. I didn't wait to find out if he was armed. I turned on my heels and bolted for the exit. I burst through the front doors, the sound of the security alarm blaring in my ears. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone to call the police. I stepped back, a safe distance away, but I couldn't tear my eyes off the front door. I watched as the man stumbled toward it, his face still twisted with that strange mix of fear and anger. Then, in a blur of motion, the door swung open, and the man ran out. He darted to the side of the building and disappeared into the darkness. I couldn't see where he went after that. My heart was racing, and I felt sick to my stomach. But I stayed put, hoping the police would get there quickly. It only took a few minutes for the officers to arrive. They asked me a million questions, and I gave them everything I could. They went inside and started looking around. I showed them the footage from the security cameras, but it was no use. The man was never captured entering the building. There was no record of him coming in at all. The footage just showed an empty building, no one coming or going. The police downloaded all the footage from the night, but it didn't help. There was no sign of how the man got in. No clues, no evidence of forced entry. Nothing. The alarms didn't go off, and the cameras didn't catch anything. It was like he'd just appeared out of thin air. I sat in the police car, shaking, while they spoke with the building's owner on the phone. Afterward, the officer told me that the company hadn't reported anything missing. They didn't know who the man was or why he'd been there. The whole thing was baffling. The police went through the building with a fine-tooth comb, but they didn't find anything unusual. The offices were still in the same condition as when I'd checked them earlier. No signs of a struggle, no stolen equipment. The place was untouched, aside from the open door. The company didn't have much to say about it. They told me they'd never had any issues with break-ins before. They didn't seem to be concerned. In fact, they barely seemed surprised. 9 a.m. The next morning, I was still on edge. I called my boss to let him know what had happened, but all he told me was to take the rest of the week off. He said I could use the time to recover from the ordeal. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way the company reacted didn't sit well with me. They were too calm, too nonchalant about the whole situation. I started to wonder if they knew more than they were letting on. Maybe they had some history with the man, or maybe they had something to do with why he was there. I wasn't sure, but something felt off. The whole situation didn't add up. The 2nd of April, 2020. A few weeks passed, and I never heard anything about the intruder again. I tried to move on, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I even went back to the office to check the security footage again, but nothing new showed up. The building was quiet, the same as always. I didn't see anything that would explain the man's presence. I ended up quitting my job a few months later. I got a new position elsewhere, one that didn't involve late-night shifts in empty buildings, but I still think about that night. Every now and then, how the man got in, why he was there, and why the company didn't seem to care. I don't know what happened, but I don't think I'll ever forget the feeling of being watched, the eyes of that man staring back at me in the dark. The strange thing is, I never found out who he was. I don't know if he was just a random intruder or if he had some connection to the company. But I still have this nagging feeling that there's more to the story, something I'll never know.